There's something happening in Arkansas right now that seems impossible. Farmers are walking away from perfectly healthy crops, leaving them unharvested in the fields. Not because of weather, not because of disease, but because harvesting them would cost more money than the crops are worth. Let me show you the numbers that explain why. The University of Arkansas Division of Agriculture publishes annual crop enterprise budgets. These are detailed breakdowns of what it costs to grow each major crop and what farmers can expect to earn. For 2024 and projected into 2025, these budgets show something alarming. Every major crop in Arkansas is projected to lose money. Not some crops. Not most crops. Every single one. This isn't a prediction. This isn't speculation. This is agricultural economists at a major state university running the numbers and showing that the fundamental economics of farming in Arkansas are broken. And when the math says you'll lose less money by abandoning a crop than by harvesting it, farmers are making the only rational decision they can. They're walking away. This is a story of why that's happening, what it means for Arkansas, and what happens when growing food becomes a guaranteed path to bankruptcy. Let me walk you through the economics so you understand exactly why farmers are making this decision. The University of Arkansas Division of Agriculture calculates crop enterprise budgets every year. These budgets account for every cost involved in producing a crop: land rent or ownership costs, seed, fertilizer, pesticides, and herbicides, fuel, equipment, labor, everything. They also project revenue based on expected yields and current market prices. For the 2024 to 2025 crop year, here's what those budgets show for Arkansas's major crops. Rice. Arkansas produces about half of all rice grown in the United States. Rice is the state's signature crop. The projected budget shows a loss of approximately $200 to $300 per acre, depending on the specific variety and production method. Soybeans. Arkansas typically plants over 3 million acres of soybeans annually. The projected loss is approximately $80 to $150 per acre. Cotton. Once king in the Arkansas Delta, cotton budgets show losses of $300 to $400 per acre. Corn. Used for feed, ethanol, and export. Losses of approximately $250 to $300 per acre. These aren't worst-case scenarios. These are the average expected outcomes using standard production practices and current market prices. Now here's the critical part. These budgets include all production costs up to harvest, but they don't fully account for the decision point farmers face at harvest time. Let's walk through what happens when a farmer with a mature crop has to decide whether to harvest it. Say you're a rice farmer with 100 acres ready to harvest. Your crop is healthy. Your yield looks good. But rice prices are at 8-year lows. You already spent everything it costs to grow that rice. That money is gone whether you harvest or not. Now you have to decide. Do I spend more money to harvest this crop? Harvesting costs money. Real money. You need diesel fuel for the combine. A combine burns 20 to 30 gallons per hour. At current diesel prices of around $3.50 to $4 per gallon, that's $75 to $100 per hour just in fuel. You need labor to operate equipment. Either you're paying yourself or paying workers. Labor costs in agriculture have increased approximately 9% from 2021 to 2024 across Arkansas. You need trucks to haul the grain from the field to the elevator or mill. Either you own those trucks and pay for fuel and maintenance, or you hire someone and pay their rate. You need storage if the elevator is full or if you're hoping prices will improve. Storage costs money every month. And when you finally sell, you're getting a price that's lower than it's been in years, while every one of those input costs is higher than it was 5 years ago. So the math becomes brutal. If your crop is worth less than what it costs to harvest, transport, and sell it, you lose less money by leaving it in the field. That's not a farming decision. That's just math. To understand why Arkansas farmers are in this situation, you need to understand what happened to agricultural economics over the last 5 years. In 2020 and 2021, input costs started rising. Fertilizer prices increased dramatically because fertilizer production depends on natural gas, and natural gas prices spiked. Then in 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. Both Russia and Belarus are major fertilizer exporters. That supply disruption sent fertilizer prices up 200 to 300% compared to 2019 levels. Fertilizer is one of the biggest costs in crop production. For corn, nitrogen fertilizer alone can account for 30 to 40% of input costs. When those prices triple, your cost per acre skyrocket. At the same time, diesel fuel prices increased. In 2020, diesel averaged around $2.50 per gallon. By mid-2022, it hit $5 or more in many areas. As of 2024 and 2025, it's declined but still runs $3.50 to $4, well above historical averages. Seed costs increased 25 to 35% from 2020 to 2025. Genetically modified seeds with herbicide resistance and insect protection cost more. Companies developing these seeds increased prices to cover research costs and maximize profit. Equipment prices increased 15 to 25% due to supply chain disruptions, steel costs, and increased demand. A new cotton picker can cost $700,000. A new combine can cost $500,000 to $600,000. And even used equipment prices increased because new equipment was hard to get. Labor costs increased as workers became harder to find and farms had to compete with other industries for workers. So by 2023, farmers were facing input costs that were 40 to 60% higher than they were in 2019, depending on the specific crop and operation. Now, if crop prices had increased proportionally, farmers would be fine. High costs, but high revenue. But that's not what happened. Commodity prices did increase in 2020 and 2021. Supply disruptions from COVID, strong export demand, and weather issues in other producing countries drove prices up. Corn hit $7 per bushel. Soybeans hit $16. Farmers who sold at those peak prices did well. But by late 2022 and into 2023, prices started declining. Global production recovered. Export demand softened. China's economy slowed. Brazil expanded production of soybeans and corn, competing with U.S. exports. By 2024, corn was back to around $4 to $4.50 per bushel. Soybeans $10 to $11. Rice prices dropped to levels not seen in 8 years according to industry reports. The problem is that prices fell back to near pre-2020 levels, but input costs didn't. Fertilizer prices came down from their 2022 peaks, but remained elevated. Diesel came down but not to 2019 levels. Seed, equipment, and labor costs stayed high. So farmers entered the 2024 and 2025 crop years facing a situation where their costs were 40 to 50% higher than 2019, but their revenue was only 10 to 20% higher. The math doesn't work. The University of Arkansas economists ran the numbers and published budgets showing that at current price levels and current cost levels, farmers lose money on every acre they plant. But farmers plant it anyway. Because what else are they going to do? Farming is what they know. Farming is what their land is equipped for. And there was always hope that prices would improve by harvest time. They didn't. So now we're at harvest time in late 2024 and 2025, and farmers are facing the decision. Let's walk through a specific example with real numbers so you understand the calculation. You're a rice farmer in eastern Arkansas. You planted 100 acres of rice. You spent everything it took to grow that rice. Here's what that cost you: land rent or ownership cost, $150 per acre. Seed, $100 per acre. Fertilizer, $200 per acre. Pesticides and herbicides, $75 per acre. Fuel for planting, spraying, irrigating, $80 per acre. Equipment operation and maintenance, $100 per acre. Irrigation, water, and electricity, $50 per acre. Crop insurance, $30 per acre. Miscellaneous costs, $40 per acre. Total cost to grow the crop, $825 per acre. For 100 acres, that's $82,500 you've already spent. Now your rice is ready to harvest. You expect to get about 7,000 weight per acre, which is a good yield. That's 7,000 pounds per acre. Current rice prices are approximately $15 per hundredweight. So 7,000 weight times $15 equals $1,050 per acre in gross revenue. That sounds good. $1,050 revenue minus $825 in costs equals $225 profit per acre. Harvest the crop, right? Not so fast. That $825 in production costs doesn't include harvest costs. Those are separate. Harvest costs include combined operation, fuel, maintenance, labor. Approximately $60 to $80 per acre depending on field conditions and equipment efficiency. Hauling, getting the rice from the field to the mill. Either you're using your own trucks and paying for fuel, or you're hiring someone. Approximately $20 to $30 per acre. Drying. Rice often needs to be dried to proper moisture content before milling. Cost varies but can be $20 to $40 per acre equivalent depending on moisture levels and drying method. Let's use conservative numbers. $70 for combining, $25 for hauling. $30 for drying, that's $125 per acre in harvest costs. So now your math is gross revenue, $1,050 per acre. Production costs already spent, $825 per acre. Harvest costs, $125 per acre. Total costs, $950 per acre. Net return, $100 per acre. Okay, so you're making $100 per acre, still worth harvesting. Except we haven't factored in two more things: storage and the time value of money. If the elevator or mill is full, you have to store your rice. Storage costs run about 15 to 20 cents per hundredweight per month. If you store for 3 months, that's another $30 to $40 per acre. And there's opportunity cost. You're tying up the money you spend on harvest for weeks or months before you get paid. If you have to borrow to cover harvest costs, you're paying interest. Even if you're using your own money, you're forgoing other uses of that cash. But let's ignore those for now and say you're still making $100 per acre after harvest costs. That $100 per acre on 100 acres is $10,000 before taxes, before paying yourself for the time you spent managing the crop all season. Now, here's the real problem. What if prices drop before you sell? Rice prices have been declining throughout 2024. If by the time you harvest and deliver, prices have dropped from $15 per hundredweight to $14, you just lost $70 per acre in revenue. Now, instead of making $100 per acre, you're making $30 per acre. What if prices drop to $13? Now you're losing $40 per acre by harvesting. You would have been better off walking away. And that's the calculation farmers are running. With prices this low and this volatile, and with harvest costs this high, the margin is so thin that many farmers are concluding it's not worth the risk. Better to lose the $825 per acre you already spent than to lose $825 plus $125 more trying to harvest a crop that might not be worth harvesting by the time you get it to market. So what physically happens when a farmer decides not to harvest? It depends on the crop and the farmer's resources. For rice, if the farmer has already drained the field for harvest, the rice will eventually dry out and decompose. Some farmers will reflood the fields to speed up decomposition and return nutrients to the soil. Others will use equipment to chop up the rice stubble and work it back into the soil. For soybeans and cotton, the plants will eventually dry out completely. Some farmers will use a bush hog, which is essentially a large mower, to cut down the plants. Others will use a disc or field cultivator to chop up the plants and work them into the soil. For corn, the stalks will dry and eventually be worked back into the soil in preparation for next season. This isn't unusual. Even in good years, farmers sometimes abandon portions of fields where yields are too poor to justify harvest costs. What's unusual is the scale and the fact that healthy, productive crops are being abandoned, not because they failed, but because the economics don't work. The irony is bitter. You have food rotting in fields while people go hungry. You have fiber crops that can make clothes decomposing into the soil. And you have farmers who spent an entire season growing these crops walking away from them. From an environmental perspective, working crop residue back into the soil does return nutrients and organic matter, so it's not total waste. But from an economic and food security perspective, it's tragic. One important note: abandoned crops don't mean farmers can't use that land next year. The fields will be prepared for the next season. Farmers will decide whether to plant again based on whether they can get credit and whether they think next year's economics will be any better. The bigger problem is what happens next. Because abandoning crops this year means farmers may not be able to farm next year. Farming requires capital, a lot of capital. To plant a crop, you need money for seed, fertilizer, chemicals, fuel, and labor. Most farmers borrow this money through operating loans. Operating loans are short-term loans, typically for one season. You borrow in the spring to plant. You repay in the fall after harvest when you sell your crop. These loans are based on expected revenue from the crop. The lender calculates how much crop you'll grow, what it will sell for, and how much you can afford to borrow and repay. If you lose money on your crop this year, you can't repay your operating loan. If you can't repay this year's loan, the lender won't give you a loan next year. And without an operating loan, you can't plant a crop. This is the death spiral that farms enter when they have consecutive unprofitable years. Year 1, you lose money, but you had reserves, or you borrow against equity in land or equipment. You survive. Year 2, you lose money again. Your reserves are depleted. Your equity is gone. You default on loans. Year 3, no one will lend to you. You can't plant. You go out of business. The University of Arkansas crop budget showing losses for multiple consecutive years means many farmers are now in year 2 or year 3 of this spiral. Lenders are becoming extremely cautious about agricultural loans. They're seeing default rates increase. They're seeing farm bankruptcies increase. And they're tightening credit standards. Federal Reserve data on agricultural credit shows farm loan delinquencies have increased from 2023 into 2024. Banks are requiring more collateral, higher down payments, and stricter repayment terms. For farmers on the edge, this means they simply can't get credit even if they want to plant. The USDA does offer some assistance through programs like the Farm Service Agency Direct and guaranteed loan programs. But these have limited funding and strict eligibility requirements. They help some farmers, but not all. And even USDA programs can't lend to farmers who have no realistic path to profitability. If the crop budgets show you'll lose money, a loan just means you'll be even deeper in debt when you inevitably can't repay. When farms fail, the damage spreads far beyond the farm gate. Think about all the businesses that depend on agriculture. Seed dealers, fertilizer suppliers, chemical suppliers, equipment dealers, repair shops, grain elevators, mills, trucking companies, banks, insurance agents, accountants. Every one of these businesses is tied to the agricultural economy. When farmers can't afford to buy inputs, the input suppliers lose sales. When farmers can't harvest, the elevators and mills process less grain. When farmers go bankrupt, the equipment dealers can't sell machinery. The economic multiplier effect in rural communities means that $1 of farm income generates additional economic activity in the local economy. The exact multiplier varies by study, but it's generally estimated that every dollar of farm income generates $1 to $2 of additional economic activity. That means when farmers collectively lose $1 billion in income, rural communities lose $1 to $2 billion in total economic activity. That translates to job losses, business closures, and declining tax revenue for local governments. Small towns in agricultural areas are already struggling. Rural population decline has been happening for decades. Young people leave for cities where there are more opportunities. Schools consolidate. Hospitals close. Main streets empty. An agricultural crisis accelerates this decline. When the remaining economic base, farming, collapses, there's nothing left to support these communities. We're seeing reports of equipment dealerships closing, grain elevators laying off workers, input suppliers reducing hours or shutting down locations. These aren't hypothetical future consequences. This is happening now in rural Arkansas. And once this infrastructure is gone, it doesn't come back easily. If every John Deere dealer in Arkansas closes, and 5 years from now farm economics improve and farmers want to buy equipment, where do they buy it? If grain elevators shut down, where do farmers take their grain? The loss of agricultural infrastructure makes it even harder for farming to recover even if market conditions improve. It's important to understand that Arkansas is not unique. Farmers across the United States are facing similar economic pressures. The USDA Economic Research Service tracks farm income nationally. Their data shows that net farm income, which is total revenue minus total expenses, has declined significantly from the peak years of 2021 and 2022. Many commodity prices peaked in 2022 and have declined since. Meanwhile, production costs remain elevated. This squeeze is affecting farmers in every major agricultural state. Iowa farmers face the same fertilizer and seed costs. Kansas wheat farmers face the same diesel and equipment costs. California farmers face the same labor cost increases. But Arkansas has some specific vulnerabilities. Rice, which is Arkansas's signature crop, has been hit particularly hard by price declines. Arkansas rice farmers have fewer alternative crops to switch to compared to farmers in states with more diverse agricultural options. Eastern Arkansas, where most rice and row crop production occurs, is heavily dependent on agriculture. There aren't major cities or industrial employers to provide alternative economic activity. When agriculture struggles, the entire regional economy struggles. This is different from, say, Iowa, where Des Moines provides insurance and financial services jobs, or California, where technology and entertainment industries exist alongside agriculture. Arkansas's rural economy is more vulnerable because it's more dependent on agriculture with fewer alternatives. The other factor is that Arkansas is a relatively poor state compared to the national average. Median household income in Arkansas is lower than the national median. When economic shocks hit, there's less financial cushion for families and communities to absorb the impact. The federal government has several programs designed to help farmers during difficult economic times. Crop insurance, administered by the USDA Risk Management Agency, provides protection against yield losses from weather and other perils. If your crop is destroyed by drought, flood, hail, or other covered events, crop insurance pays out. But crop insurance generally doesn't cover price risk. If your crop grows fine but prices crash, you don't get an insurance payment. There are price insurance products, but they're more expensive and not as widely used. So farmers who grew healthy crops in 2024 and 2025 but face low prices aren't getting insurance payments. Insurance helps when nature destroys your crop. It doesn't help when economics destroy your farm. The USDA also offers various disaster assistance programs. These provide payments when certain conditions are met. But these programs have limited funding and specific eligibility criteria. Not every economic loss qualifies. Congress has historically passed emergency aid packages for agriculture during severe crises. The Farm Bill, which is reauthorized roughly every 5 years, sets the framework for agricultural policy and programs. However, political gridlock in recent years has made it difficult to pass comprehensive agricultural legislation. The current Farm Bill was extended temporarily, but long-term policy is uncertain. Even when aid programs exist, they often provide only partial relief. A payment of $30 per acre doesn't solve the problem if you're losing $300 per acre. And there's a philosophical debate about agricultural subsidies and market intervention. Some argue that government should let markets work and that inefficient farms should fail so resources can be reallocated. Others argue that food security is a national interest and that supporting domestic agriculture is essential. That debate is beyond the scope of this video. The point is that government programs exist, but they have limitations, and they're not preventing the crisis we're seeing in Arkansas and other states. When farms go out of business, it affects more than just farmers and rural communities. It affects the food system and ultimately consumers. The United States has enjoyed abundant, affordable food for decades. Americans spend a smaller percentage of income on food than any other country. That's because U.S. agriculture is incredibly productive. But that productivity depends on farmers staying in business. If large numbers of farms fail and agricultural production declines, several things can happen. Food prices could increase as domestic supply decreases. The U.S. would become more dependent on food imports, which creates vulnerability to global supply disruptions and geopolitical events. Farmland that goes out of production doesn't always come back into production quickly. If land sits idle for years, it may be converted to other uses or may require significant investment to bring back into production. The knowledge and expertise that experienced farmers have doesn't transfer automatically. When generational farms fail, that knowledge is lost. You can't easily replace decades of experience and local knowledge about soils, weather patterns, and agricultural practices. There's also a national security dimension. Countries that can't feed themselves are vulnerable. The U.S. has long considered food security a strategic priority. A collapse of domestic agriculture would undermine that security. Now, we're not at immediate risk of food shortages. The U.S. agricultural sector is large and resilient. But the trend is concerning. If the economics of farming continue to push farmers out of business, at some point it affects food availability and affordability. So what happens next? As of early 2026, farmers are making decisions about whether to plant crops for the coming season. Those decisions depend on several factors. Can they get credit? If they lost money in 2024 and 2025, lenders may refuse to extend operating loans for 2026. What are projected prices? If commodity prices remain at current levels, the University of Arkansas budgets will likely continue to show losses. Why plant a crop you know will lose money? What are input costs? If fertilizer, seed, and fuel costs decline, profitability improves. If they stay elevated or increase, the situation worsens. What government assistance is available? If Congress passes significant agricultural aid or if the Farm Bill is reauthorized with stronger support programs, some farmers may have help bridging the gap. The most likely scenario is that some farmers will plant reduced acreage, focusing on their most productive land. Some will not plant at all. Some will exit farming entirely, selling or renting their land to larger operations. This consolidation has been a long-term trend in U.S. agriculture. The number of farms decreases while average farm size increases. Periods of economic stress accelerate this consolidation. The farmers who survive will be those with the strongest balance sheets, the most efficient operations, and the ability to achieve economies of scale. Smaller, less capitalized operations will struggle to survive. For rural Arkansas communities, the outlook is challenging. Further population decline, more business closures, reduced tax revenue for schools and services. The social fabric of these communities will continue to fray. Arkansas farmers are abandoning crops not because they want to, but because the economics force them to. When harvest costs exceed crop value, the rational decision is to walk away. This isn't a natural disaster. This isn't weather or pests or disease. This is a market failure, a situation where the structure of agricultural economics is broken down to the point that growing food is a path to bankruptcy. The numbers from the University of Arkansas are clear. At current price levels and current cost levels, farming doesn't work financially. Some farmers will find a way to survive. They'll cut costs. They'll increase efficiency. They'll operate on razor-thin margins and hope for better years ahead. Some will exit farming, ending multi-generational operations. And rural Arkansas will continue to struggle with the economic consequences of an agricultural sector in crisis. The crops rotting in fields aren't just wasted food. They're symbols of an economic system that's failing the people who feed us. Whether that system can be fixed and how is a question that goes far beyond Arkansas. But the consequences of not fixing it are playing out in real time in fields across the state. Abandoned crops, failing farms, dying communities. That's the reality of Arkansas agriculture in 2025 and 2026. And until something fundamental changes in agricultural economics, that reality will continue.